and that's.
Do you think? I mean, do you think obviously, someone who suffered greatly yourself, Mozambique? I mean, do you feel that this catch-all of terrorism and threat of Islam is allowing a kind of breakdown of our legal system, and this is a kind of microcosm of it that we should sit up and listen to?
Evidently, you can see that the raft of anti-terror measures and legislations that have been forced through since 9/11, and even before, to be honest, if you look at some of the acts prior to that, you can see that de facto they affect only Muslims. So nobody will say that these laws are designed only for Muslims, but in de facto they really do. And you can see the anti-terror legislation in relation to the glorification of terrorism, up until the conviction of somebody for writing poetry or downloading stuff from the internet. These are the sorts of things we're seeing.
The 2006 Terrorism Act. Yeah,
but you're seeing all of these things now at a time, in comparison, at the height of the IRA campaign, which included bombing of 10 Downing Street and hitting the MI5 building, taking out the Queen's nephew and so forth. You never saw these measures being introduced in the way that they are, so much so that even people talking about, and this is what Babar Ahmad's case, let's say that he did do what they alleged for him to have done, i.e. put information onto a website. You would have never have thought at the height of the IRA campaign that this sort of stuff
I mean, on one level he was, even if he did do this, he'd be supporting resistance movements who are fighting occupation and certainly fighting for human rights abroad. Which,
right, and of course the bulk of the allegation are not even centred around Afghanistan. The bulk of the allegation, from what I understand, is centred around Chechnya. And what does Britain have to do with that?
What does America have to do with Chechnya?
Sorry, what does America have to do with this?
Certainly the abuses of the Russians in Chechnya is well documented in that sense. And I don't know if we're too far away from the case of Babar, and we'll come back to extradition in a minute, but I just want to quickly ask you about that sense of threat. I mean, why has this emerged as somehow the West, which spends, so much more on arms than any Muslim country, that, why does it feel somehow under threat when, after all, there's more chance of, I think, dying from being hit by lightning than from an act of terrorism? Yet, well, what's this all about?
Like you said, if you take Babar Ahmad's case and put it as part of the microcosm, and then project it onto the rest of the world, you can see exactly what's going on. They create the enemy. They create the hype around him. They say that this guy is so dangerous that we need to go in full force, and it doesn't matter if a few arms or legs get broken off, if some bruises and other abrasions take place. We're fighting such a vicious enemy at the moment. It is better to go in hard than take the consequences afterwards, than to suffer the consequences if we don't go in. And that's what they've done with the Muslim world all around. That's why you can see the disproportionate attacks, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's a mechanized, the world's most powerful force fighting the world's most impoverished nation, and using force at a level that they would never justify elsewhere.
Right, because it's
almost as if they're
Islamic
fighting
countries that are largely under threat. Perhaps you could even argue that Islamic civilization has been, challenged by the onslaught from the West, the economic superiority of the West in that sense, the media and all of these over the years. I mean, before we talked about extradition, why do you think that this kind of inversion of truth is kind of in the minds of people?
I mean, for all sorts of reasons, because a climate of fear effectively helps to sell, whatever it is that they're trying to sell to the public. So if they call Babar Ahmad Al-Qaeda's London general, for example, it helps to demonize him enough so that public pressure doesn't come against the injustice that's taking place. If you call a man, Bin Laden's London general, then, Joe Public is not going to turn around and say, isn't it terrible that he's facing extradition to the US without a prima facie case? He's not going to turn around and say that. He's going to say, if he's Bin Laden's London general, then he bloody well deserves it.
Yeah.
And that kind of media stigmatization that has been so endemic to terrorism cases here in the UK has unfortunately probably been one of the worst excesses of the way that this government and its various institutions have carried their policies out.
Okay, well listen, let's move on now to one thing, Asim, and we'll come to you about this, and it's the whole question of extradition law And in fact, this week there was a review led by a former Court of Appeal judge, Sir Scott Baker, and he concluded that laws governing the extradition of Britons to the United States are fair. The treaty governing extradition does not operate in an unbalanced manner, according to Sir Scott. Well, I mean, the review contradicts the findings of MPs on the Joint Committee on Human Rights, which called for the government to renegotiate the treaty to ensure British citizens get the same protection as Americans. Well, I mean, look, a lot of people don't know about extradition law. Basically, what we've already found out is that Babar Ahmad was arrested. There wasn't enough evidence in Britain, but the Americans say that there is evidence because a portal he used was based in Connecticut for a short time. Now, how does the extradition thing work next?
Okay, if I could just give a quick background to it. As part of the government's counter-terrorism policies, one of the things that the UK government wanted to put through was an extradition act that effectively would allow for the extradition of terrorism suspects to the US just on the basis of allegations. Okay, so the Extradition Act of 2003 was rushed through Parliament extremely quickly without any debate really whatsoever. Rushed through and it was passed very, very easily. And what it allows is for any British citizen to be sent to America, to be extradited to America just on the basis of allegations from America. The Americans don't have to provide any evidence, they don't have to prove anything. All they have to do is provide the UK government with a list of allegations to say, we believe that he has done X, Y, and Z wrong, and we want him in our country. And the UK government is obliged to send that person over to the US. Now, it doesn't work the other way around. The treaty is disproportionate. The UK government is not allowed to ask for an American citizen without a prima facie case first. That American citizen will get the right to a trial to challenge the evidence that the British government has before he's sent over here. So it's disproportionate for a start.
So basically, it's on this allegation in the United States that he's been 7 years. Babar's been 7 years in jail. Now, why has it taken 7 years? Let's deal with that quickly. Simply appeals, is it? And you know, it's been taken to different courts.
You know, he's gone through the appeals process in this country. Let's be clear about that as well. Part of the Extradition Act is that it removes certain levels of the appeals process. So I think he was able to have 2 appeals here in the UK, and then it was immediately he was sent to Europe, whereas he wasn't allowed to go all the way to the highest courts in the country in order to appeal against his case.
And now it's before the European Court of Human Rights, is that right?
That's right. That's before the European Court of Human Rights.
And is there a judgment expected, or we don't know?
We've been waiting for a judgment for the last 2 years from the European Court of Human Rights. And I mean, really, Babar has been in legal limbo this whole time.
And were you surprised this week by the judgments of the committee that was set up to review the law, which seems to me, from what you say, to be desperately unfair? But they said it was good.
Well,
fine.
It's surprising because, as you mentioned before, the Joint Committee for Human Rights, I mean, this is a committee that's established by members of Parliament who obviously understand their constituents, you know, what their wants and desires are, and who understand human rights to a fairly high degree. And, you know, they turned around and said, well, the act is disproportionate, the measures are unfair. But more importantly than that, both the Tory government and the Lib Dems, as part of their mandates, said that the Extradition Act is unfair. You know, this is something that they were both saying before they, But
this is going to keep it in place, isn't it, this review now?
Well, this is just an advice. This is just an advice. It's not a legally binding thing on the government. It's just an advice. In fact, what's more binding on the government is actually the recommendations of the Joint Committee for Human Rights. So we're hoping that will be the thing that's taken up, because, especially in light of the Lib Dems being extremely strong about extradition prior to this, and also the Conservative Party being extremely strong as well. Both of them said the same thing, that it is unfair, it is disproportionate, and they should bear that in mind.
But you don't think that being in government they can change their mind on such issues? It often happens.
Of course they can. Unfortunately, that might well happen, but it's our responsibility to try and change their minds.
Asif Qureshi, we thank you very much. We're coming to the end of this half. Muazzam Beg, you'll be staying with us. Thank you very much for that. Asim, a big thank you for your contribution. In the second half, we'll find out what's being done to help Babar, or at least get him tried in the UK. That's in a few minutes. Please stay with us. Welcome back to this Islam Channel special on Absent Justice, the case of Babar Ahmad, trapped in a legal black hole that has left him jailed without trial for over 7 years. Well, from all accounts, Babar Ahmad was an unassuming and studious young man. He had an interest in martial arts. One night, the police came. He was beaten up. He was taken away. How has this ordeal affected Babar and his family?
When it initially happened, there was a lot of confusion. We were totally taken by surprise. Didn't know what was going on. We were very anxious. There were a lot of emotions at the time. We were praying. We couldn't stay in our homes for about 24 hours whilst they were being searched. So we were staying with a relative. So it was a very difficult period of time. And 8 months later, we had a knock on the door, and it was a policeman. He said, "Oh, can I come in?" And I said, we'd been experienced from before, so I was like, "Well, not really, unless you've got a reason. Do you have a warrant or something?" And then he said to me that, "Do you know Babar Ahmad?" And then my heart sank, and I was like, "Yes." He said, "Well, I need to come in." And he came in, and he said that we've arrested him again on an extradition warrant from the United States. He keeps himself busy. He reads a lot. He tries to keep positive, but obviously, uncertainty of fate is something which is a very, very difficult thing for anyone to have to deal with. At least if you know where you're going and what's going to happen or when this might end, you can plan your life, or you can at least have something to look forward to. But he doesn't know if he's ever going to get out, if he's ever going to be with us again.
And then at the back, he's written teddy bears for my brothers. One for Ibrahim, my younger brother, but he was the oldest brother. Then Yusuf, then the Johns. I've got used to it now, but when I was 1.5, he went to prison. But before, he used to come to my mum's house on the way to work and have breakfast with us. And then I didn't know, I was like a little girl, I didn't know what happened. And Ibrahim, my younger brother, was 7 weeks old when he went. He's really nice to us, and when we go to the prison, he makes us feel important and special. He's always smiling, and he always tells us what's wrong and what's right, and he's always talking about the good things about the prison. And I'd like to see him draw like really nice things, because you've seen the card, it's really nice. Yeah, I'd like to see how he can make these things and if he can teach me.